Well, I pursued this conversation because I had the opportunity to talk with the rest of the team on the red carpet at Sundance last year.
Oh, fantastic.
Um, I missed you somehow.
Yeah, at Sundance for like one day
uh,
at premiere because I had a relatively new baby at the time. I didn't want to be away.
mm,
So
hmm.
yeah, it was a very quick trip for me. I didn't get much of the rounds as I wanted to.
That's fair. That's fair. Very cool. I'm glad that we get to talk now. And I guess since then, I'm curious at how the journey for this movie has been for you. I'm sure it's played festivals, it's gotten more exposure. Tell me about that journey from Sundance to where we are now.
Yeah, sure. When you work on a movie, it's always a really interesting thing. The whole process from you know finishing the score, which might happen months or even longer until there's a festival premiere. And then when there's a festival premiere, you know, hopefully, ideally, it gets picked up by a distributor, and then you don't know if it's going to take 6 months or it could take a year um, or longer for that to happen, and then to schedule a release and if it's theatrical or the streaming or whatnot. So the whole process from finishing the score to the movie coming out, which is happening, last week in this case, uh,
Hmm.
so long, and you sort of you move on and you work on other things, and it feels like a whole other lifetime ago.
Hmm.
Uh,
I'm
so that
sure.
yeah, because we were at Sundance in January 2025,
Hmm.
and at that point, I had finished the score in uh, July 2024,
What a
and
what a long journey for you.
yeah, so it's been a very, but I'm, with more and more distance, because when you're working on the thing, you're watching the movies over and over and over again, and you kind of you lose the forest for the trees a little bit. Uh, Obviously, seeing the Sundance premiere was fantastic, and
Hmm.
a really great crowd, and getting an audience reaction from everything was really satisfying. But then, another year passes, and finally we're here. Yeah, it's been really, really nice to kind of see this movie have like multiple uh, outings
Hmm.
uh, and finally be here for people, for the public to see. Oh,
Celebrate. What is this?
I don't know.
Well, I guess it's an appropriate animation because I mean, congratulations on getting to this point, really. Um, what's interesting when I was on the red carpet talking with the cast and crew, one of the things that came up a lot was how small of a production this was, and how Mira, the director, she was really just kind of pulling her friends together to like make this happen. Tell me about your involvement and being a part of this kind of scrappy production.
Sure. I've been involved with Mira's work, Mira and Paul, for my entire career, going back to uh, working on uh, Mira's student films at USC, and then um, her first feature and her second feature, and since then she's had this great career working in TV, and yeah, I was just when you have these conversations of there's a new project happening, um, you jump at the chance to work with somebody like Mira, who you have this long history with, and there's a shorthand that's been developed, and a lot of trust going both ways. So you just know you're going to be in good hands with somebody that you work with over and over again. That's
Mhm.
the most valuable thing in this business, is having that kind of relationship and having that kind of trust with somebody that you work with.
Yeah, I think I realized that when I talk more with craft teams and having those trustworthy collaborators and the people that you build, you know, that professional relationship with, it really helps create that synergy for projects. And so I'm really happy that you have that with Mira and Paul. And I think it turned out very well here for Didn't Die. Um, I want to talk a little bit about the your work on the film. The soundtrack is available now, and so it's fun to listen to that. Talk to me about your approach to creating this ominous, creepy horror score.
Yeah. Well, starting the conversations with Mira about the tone of the movie, it was very clear uh, from the very beginning that this is, this lives in generally in the horror universe, but there's so much other stuff, and that's the challenge of this project, and the fun of this project was, figuring out, okay, there's going to be scary stuff. How scary are we going? Because the music is such a huge part of that in a horror movie. You can do so much to um, keep the audience off balance, or to keep the audience comfortable, to find a sort of middle ground where you're building tension and um, still kind of giving the audience something to latch onto. Uh, and in this case, because we're dealing with something that's uh, has an underlying theme of horror, and there are scary scenes, and there are zombies, and there's violence and horrifying stuff, but the actual core of the movie is not that stuff. It's the very real human drama, and
Mhm.
kind of the comedy of what living life in a disaster actually is, which is, it's not constant dread, it's not constant horror. It's like, you know, you still have to live your life, and you still have to have the relationships with the people that you live with and interact with. There's still, like, ex-boyfriends, and there's still, like, uh, dirty jokes, and there's still, um, you know, dealing with your siblings and your parents, and etc. So that's the heart of the movie, and the horror is really just a kind of a contextual background that it all exists in. So
Mhm.
uh, the approach was, you know, how do we build like a palette of sounds, and a kind of a collection of themes and melodies, and whatnot, that can carry the audience through all those different tones, through the horror and the drama and the comedy, and not be, like, creating a whiplash back and forth,
Mhm.
where these tones are colliding in a weird way, but that making it all cohesive and carrying a thread through it all. So that was really the challenge, and I think uh, Mira's first kind of references for me in just dialoguing about the tone we were trying to create. We talked a lot about John Carpenter,
Mhm.
and that's such a good place to start, because um, he did all the music for so many of his movies, and what he was so good at was, you know, I think through this use of, like, pulses and, like, repeating rhythms, and these, like, synthesizer, um, like, pulsing kind of textures, that he can build a lot of tension and keep something feeling suspenseful, and keep the scene feeling scary. But that pulse and that rhythm, it helps the audience be comfortable in that. And so that was like a place to start where I built a lot of the score off of the idea of these like pulsing synth rhythms and uh, um, then trying to use like a strong melodic themes to carry you through that and to bridge the horror and the drama.
Hmm. You know what I'm really curious about, because I had a chance while I was going back and re-listening to the Didn't Die soundtrack. I had a chance to listen to some of your other work, and it's a wide variety of stuff that you compose for. I'm curious where you put horror when it comes to your wheelhouse of what you typically do. How is it? How far in or out of it of your wheelhouse does the horror genre fall?
Uh, yeah, horror is something that you know I I watch a lot of stuff. I'm a big fan of just movies in general, and um, I don't like to say that I like this kind of genre or that kind of genre better than any others because there's just amazing stuff in every genre. But the horror is really fun. It's as a viewer, it's something that just taps like so directly into your visceral, like the part of you that uh, it gets emotionally moved by movies. It's like it taps into that in such a direct, real way. Like fear is such a primal emotion, and being able to experience that in a controlled environment, or like that's what the genre is all about, and I do really appreciate that. And then working on it as a composer, I mean, for me, like there's nothing more fun because uh, a you get to do that to other people. You know, you get to tap into that and find a way to you know get inside somebody's most primal emotions and feelings and do that for them in a way that's satisfying and enjoyable. And uh, on the other hand, as somebody who just is obsessed with you know creating sounds and trying to find like a new and different way to make a sound and manipulate a sound. Uh, Horror is a genre where you're expected to try to innovate in that way. And you're expected to try to make weird sounds and sounds that are, uh, you know, people haven't heard before necessarily, or that you know do something to people viscerally, and that's just a really fun, satisfying thing for me. Uh, it's a genre where the music can kind of live a little more on top of the action and on top of the scene as opposed to a drama or a comedy where you're often expected to be pretty subtle under dialogue and kind of stay out of the way and give a lot of space. Horror, you're often expected to like really drive the scene. And as a composer, obviously that's very gratifying.
Yeah, no, I think those are a lot of really interesting observations that we kind of recognize but don't really identify all the time when it comes to, especially like the sounds that come out in horror scores. It's just it's kind of odd and uncanny and uneasy. I guess that's the point of it, right? To really mess with our comfort level. That's what the horror genre does. Um, I like that a lot. Um, is there a particular cue or a particular track or something, a part of the score that you are especially proud of and that you come back to listen to because you're particularly proud of what you did with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things I could mention in that way. You know, the the first scene where you're uh, Vinita is in the car and uh, Rish is walking around with the flyers before he sees the first zombie that you see there. That was basically like the first cue that I worked on. That was sort of the tone setting moment for me, and finding the palette that was going to work for the rest of the film. And um, one thing that's in there that I don't think is necessarily obvious to people, and would require a whole explanation is that uh, Mira asked me, is there something that you can do, because this is a movie about an Indian American family, and um, the the question was, is there something that we can find in the score to reflect that in a way that's not, like on the nose, maybe not super obvious. We don't want to have like a big sitar melody played over everything. But something subtle in there that we can just kind of like suggest that this music lives like with these people. And the thing that I ended up finding was, it's actually this box back here that I'm pointing to. It's called a shruti box, which is a traditional Indian drone instrument that kind of works on the same principle as an accordion, where you open up the stops to create a note or a chord, and then manually push the accordion part back and forth to bring in air. And it actually creates a really beautiful and haunting sound. And you know, the rest of that cue, and it's worked into other cues throughout the movie, but it creates this haunting backdrop that, when you add like a bunch of reverb to it and some like echoes and stuff, and create a soundscape around it. Um, it blended in so well with these all these pulsy synths, and created an organic texture for everything to like fit into. And I was really proud of how that worked out, because I was able to kind of satisfy sort of a more specific kind of conceptual ask from my director, but also bring it in sonically in a way that made sense in the movie, and I ended up really liking that.
That's really cool. Um, Boy, time flies by so fast. I have to wrap up here in a moment, but let's get one more question in. What do you think is the most important thing people should know about the music or score before going into watching Didn't Die?
Um, that's an interesting question. The most important thing to know about the music, I think, is it's that, you know another thing I'll say about the score, on this note, is that there are, like you mentioned, that I have a lot of different things going on in my repertoire, and this movie really encapsulates that, because there are, you know very like classic horror moments in the score, and there's this John Carpenter style like synth retro synth thing happening, uh, and then there's also all this jazz stuff that popped out, um, and that's kind of something that I'm also very proud of, which is uh, my background as a jazz musician. That's like my musical training primarily, and just somehow in this movie, the thing about having trust from your director is that sometimes you can find something that just works for a reason that you can't even put your finger on, but when you when you watch the scene, you just felt it, and you know that the people you're working with are gonna be open to it, and hear you out. So there's the very beginning and very end and middle is like a bookend of these jazz pieces that were based off of Beautiful Dreamer, which is a song that's featured in the movie.
Mhm.
And that kind of represents in the movie this sense of, even when you're in this disastrous apocalyptic situation, the world's been overrun by zombies, people are dying, um, you know, there's still something to hold on to, and something to find meaning in, whether it's just your family, your friends, um, you know, romance, or even just like self-respect. Um, that song kind of encapsulates that in the movie, and uh, I was able to make these like celebratory jazz pieces out of that, that somehow work in the context of all this other stuff in the movie. And um, you know, I think the takeaway from that is that, you know, as long as it's sincerely felt and it comes organically out of the content of the movie, like anything goes. And if you're a creative person, that's a great thing to keep in mind.
That's really cool. Really great feedback to hear. I love it. Once again, dude, congratulations on your work with Didn't Die and the movie being available now for people to watch. I am so happy I've had the chance to cover this film from Sundance to now with you. And yeah, I can't wait for more people to hear your take on this. And I'm definitely going to keep up with you because I've listened to your jazz stuff. I like it a lot.
Thank
Jazz
you.
is a genre I really really appreciate. So I'll be keeping up with your work. Okay.
All right, thanks so much. Really enjoyed talking to you.